Folks, Jermaine Ferrell in the house with the WFXR Sports Sit Down on WFXRTV.com, and it's always a pleasure linking up with great people, and this young man is no exception. You talk about clutch kickers. This guy's had a few in his career. Played high school football for the Pulaski County Cougars, then went on to Virginia Tech to play there in some big games there, and then went into a 15-year career in the NFL. Hope I got that number right. And then went into coaching, coached at Central Michigan, coached at Florida, and spots like that. And it's my pleasure to be joined by the pride of the New River Valley, Shayne Graham. What is up, Mr. Graham?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good stuff. But you know, a lot of stuff I want to get to with you, and I again appreciate your time. But the first thing I want to ask you is, where did your love for sports and where did your love for, you know, being at athletics, where did all that come from?
Well, you know, growing up, my sister was always very, very competitive and very talented in the sports world. I mean, she won a couple state championships at Radford High School for basketball. She had a full scholarship for basketball in college and, you know, played really well throughout her career there. So growing up, watching her play every sport she played in leagues that were, honestly, most of the leagues back then were co-ed, or she would be the only girl on the team. And to be honest, she was better than most of the people on the team. And she just had such a knack for hard work and never settling for anything. She always wanted to be the best and always worked so hard. So when I would watch her run around the neighborhood or run hills and run sprints in the backyard or go to the gym and shoot for hours and run, you know, just all the work she put in when I'm a little kid and I'm seeing that and I'm seeing how successful she was becoming, it drove me. And I think my parents did a really good job of always kind of not forcing us to do anything, but helping us find the attitude that if we don't do it, someone's going to be better than us. And so we always kind of put that into our competitive drive to always try to be as good as we could be at something, not necessarily be the best. We just wanted to be as good as we could be. And if it ended up being that other way, because there's always going to be someone better than you out there. But, you know, I think that was what drove us, was just always having that competitive drive to make ourselves the best we could be.
And then speaking of being the best you could be, sounds like an Army term right there. You know, want to ask you, obviously, great career at Pulaski County, winning a state championship. You know, I played at Patchbury, played for the Patriots, and we know that Pulaski rivalry, how it was back in the day. I got to ask you this, you know, Joel Hicks, a legend. I mean, no doubt about it. State championship coach. Talk about, first of all, what was it like during that time period? Because basically, when you think of high school football back in the, you know, the 80s and the 90s, it was pretty much Pulaski County was one of the first teams you're going to mention from this area. What was it like being a part of such a strong and dominating football program and tradition?
Well, I think what made it special, at least for me and for many of the young men around me that I grew up with, we were always held to a really high standard. And if any of us didn't reach that standard, we were either left behind or we were reminded of what that standard was. And when you had someone like Coach Hicks, who just did such a good job of helping, you know, boys become grown men, I give him a ton of credit for what he was able to help me mature and get through some of the things that taught me so many lessons to become a man, you know, in that age of your, you know, of your life, when everything is so susceptible to all these other influences, to have such a strong figure like him to help you understand responsibility and accountability and all those kinds of things. And you know that he'll come down on you if you're not where you're supposed to be. Was such a strong foundation for life and sports to have that. And it showed because we won games. You know, we were very consistently winning, you know, the Roanoke Valley District back then. And we had probably the entire population of our county at every football game. I mean, it was thousands and thousands and thousands of fans filling stadiums, and they would travel on the road, and you got to see part of that as well. But, having that as a foundation really just helped things keep going in a good direction beyond that.
And then this is kind of a two-part question. First part is, how did you get into kicking? And then the second part, I mean, you think about the tradition of kickers from Pulaski County. I mean, there's so many of them, and you're on that list. But talk about, how did you get into kicking, and then just becoming the legacy of kickers at Pulaski County? I mean, you come to mind, Brian Duncan, he knocked us off my senior year in high school.
I remember that.
We were up 21-7 against you guys, and Duncan comes in, and he had a bunch of big kicks that year. I mean, I think he had like 3 or 4 game winners, beat EC Glass, beat Woodbridge in the playoffs. And then even before that, Chris Kinzer. But talk about, how'd you get into that, and then, just being a part of that kicking tradition for the Cougars?
Well, I think a lot of it stemmed from, Kenneth Dobson was the kicking coach that we had at our school. Now, he may not have understood the soccer style kicking that I was the first to ever do at Pulaski County High School. I mean, we had, Brian Duncan, Mickey Thomas, Tony Powell, Chris Kinzer, just so many guys over the years that, had the little square-toed shoe that would just pop their leg through it. And those guys were strong and worked hard in the weight room and just created the legacy of kickers at Pulaski. When I came in, it was almost like a joke, like, what's this kid doing kicking soccer style? No one does that here. And when Coach Hicks finally kind of gave me a chance and looked at a 5'2" kid come in there that looked like I was 8 years old, he laughed and he said, "Yeah, I'll be out there in a little bit. Y'all go kick." And he came outside, and that's when he was like, "You're not playing freshman football. You're on varsity." And pardon my Joe Hicks impersonation, but that was the memory that I have, is him laughing at first, and then after that it became, you're playing on varsity and you're not playing freshman ball. And I was literally 5'2", about 110 pounds. It really started growing up playing a lot of sports, and it started with soccer, and had a knack for it. I was talented. I was, I would kick soccer balls against the wall outside the house all day. And then, one day my dad brought home a football and said, "Hey, let's try this." And when he brought this, weird shaped pointy football out there, I kicked it a few times. I ended up hitting the top of a backstop at a elementary school field in Ferrell, Virginia, and the ball popped and stuck on top of the fence stop. So he said, "Well, I guess we better buy a few more of these and see what this is all about." I got connected to a guy named Pat O'Mora, who was from Radford High School. He kicked at Ohio State, and he became my early mentor. Like, as I was getting started, showed me a lot of the original fundamentals that I really didn't know what I was doing. I just had some raw talent. He helped get me in the right direction. And then when I got to Pulaski, because Coach Hicks had such an affinity for special teams, he respected it so much. He had a guy that was a former superintendent of schools, Ken Dobson, also my dad's high school football coach. He worked with the kickers, and Coach Dobson at the time was in his 70s, but he worked with the kickers and he gave us structure. He may not have been able to teach me, but he gave me structure, and that was able to help keep a routine and kind of build a solid foundation in my kicking. But his son-in-law was a guy named Bill Renner. And Bill Renner was a punter at Virginia Tech who also had a stint in the NFL as a punter. And Bill Renner had a kicking camp that he ran with Mark Mosley. So because they had this connection, we were going to these camps over the summers during my years at Pulaski with the Mark Mosley kicking camps. And then Bill Renner took that camp over, and they created a thing called Fourth Down Sports. I was connected with Paul Woodside, at that camp who was a kicker at West Virginia, legendary kicker at West Virginia, and he's been a lifelong mentor as well. And then, just through all those connections, I always had someone I could reach out to and ask advice. Honestly, from football to life, across all spans, through that connection. And I think all of those, kind of played into my circle of success down the years.
And then obviously Pulaski, I think the thing that people remember the most, and I remember seeing this, on Friday Football Extra. I mean, because we weren't around back then, obviously our station was sports, but the state championship game, this skinny little redhead 8-year-old kid that looks like an 8-year-old, he's going out there with a game-winning kick to give Pulaski the state championship or that playoff game there. Take me back to that moment, because that's a pretty big moment. I mean, for you to go out there and help Pulaski win a state championship.
So it had only been a few weeks before that. We had a senior kicker that season that we had kind of alternated a little bit during the season, and he was actually a very talented kicker. But I think we had a game where, maybe it was a little muddy or something, and I think he had missed a kick or two or something. So Coach Hicks said, "Hey, we're going to give this freshman a chance." And then I kept getting a few opportunities, and I was making them. So we get to the state champion or the state semifinal game against Robinson High School, and it comes down to, it's a tight game. We finally throw the only pass of the entire game was a screen pass to JJ Housel. He runs down, puts us in field goal position. There's like a 30-mile-an-hour wind blowing on the field. It's, probably 10 degrees outside. There were people that weren't sure which kicker he was going to put in the game. Was he going to put the senior in, or was he going to put a freshman in? And I have no idea that there was ever a decision to be made there, because I just know I was running on the field whether anyone asked me or not, and went out. No one stopped me, so I went out and, we made the kick. And it was, definitely a highlight of a high school career, but to have it as a freshman, I think it definitely shaped a lot of what happened beyond that, because, I definitely learned not only how big was Pulaski football, but I learned that being a part of something like that made me more accountable, because that meant I had to keep working harder to hold that standard as well.
And then obviously, and I messed up, I'm sorry, it was a state semifinals, not state championship, but still it helped lead to a state championship game. But it almost feel like that was the state championship game. I remember watching some of that. And then, so you progress, you continue to grow as a kicker. All right, now obviously college is knocking on the door, and we're trying to figure out where we're trying to go to college. First of all, you went to Virginia Tech, obviously, but were there any other schools in the picture, or was you were just dead straight on going to Virginia Tech? And how did that recruiting process happen?
I'll be honest with you. I was not really a Virginia Tech fan. I wasn't really a fan of anywhere, to be honest. So Virginia Tech did not have an advantage. If anything, it was a disadvantage, because they were close. And I had this thing in my head that I wanted to go away to college. I had probably about 25 offers from other schools, Big Ten, ACC, SEC. There were a lot of offers. But the thing that really stood out through all of it was, it wasn't the fact that, with recruiting now, it's all about attention. Who gives them the most attention? Who shows the love? It wasn't that, even though I had Coach Todd Grantham and Coach Beamer all calling me all the time and talking to me and taking my visits there. I just felt like everything was home, like not because they were close, but because it was just home. And the feeling that I had dealing with them made me feel very comfortable. But the thing that tipped it over the top was the special teams emphasis that Coach Beamer put into it. And with him being the head coach and the special teams coach, it really showed me what his priorities were. And then the thing that even completely knocked it over the edge was I got a call from Caleb Hurd one day, who was my high school holder. And he goes, "Hey, I just talked to the coaches at Virginia Tech. They just told me that if you come to Virginia Tech, I can come there and hold for you." So I was like, well, okay, it's a done deal. And, from that point on, I even had offers after I committed. I had offers from a couple SEC schools trying to get me to decommit before signing day. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to Virginia Tech, and that's it. So, it kind of was cemented that I went where not only was I wanted, but where I knew I was going to be respected and where I was going to be prioritized as a kicker, and where I knew that I had a chance to be a part of something special. And as we all saw, it turned into that there.
And it definitely was a special because you were there during the time period where things were really amping up and rocking and rolling, where Virginia Tech, they were rocking and they were getting things going. If I'm not mistaken, were you there? Right? You were there obviously with Coach Fry was a graduate assistant, and
Yes.
also J.C. Price. So obviously you have familiarity. I want to ask you about them a little bit later in the interview, but talk a little bit about obviously the thing that you're remembered for at Virginia Tech is the miracle in Morgantown, the Morgantown miracle, big time kick up in Morgantown to help preserve Virginia Tech's undefeated regular season. Take me back to that moment, because I'm sure I remember watching. I was in the Army and I'm watching this from Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I'm talking trash. Hey, this is my hometown school area, and there were some West Virginia fans too in Erie. So it's a melting pot Army, and when they took the lead, I'm like, it's been a nice run, but we'll see. There's still some magic there. Take me back to that time, that whole drive, and then all of a sudden, again, you get the call to come on the field. But take me back to the part, what was going through your head when West Virginia took the lead, and then you guys had to drive down the field, and then finally you were called on to get the W.
So what I remember, once they took the lead and they kicked off to us, I remember walking past someone and I said, "Oh, just give us a chance. Just give me a chance. Just give us a chance." And I remember Corey Moore walked up to me and said, "Hey, where do we have to get to? Where do we have to get to?" And I told him the 40-yard line. During pregame of that game, I was making kicks back to about 60 yards. So I felt that if we got to the 40-yard line, I could give a last-ditch effort on a 57-yarder on the last play, if that's as close as we could get. So we ended up getting down to, I think it was the 27-yard line, I believe. Multiple passes down the field. Obviously, Michael's run down the sideline will be a legendary play that will live in the lore of Virginia Tech forever. But during that time, I was kicking in the net, and I wasn't even watching those plays. And then I remember when Michael made that run, that's when I turned around, snapped my chin strap, and started walking up to the head coach to get the signal for go on out there and do this. And, I just remember when we walked out on the field, Caleb and I were out there. They called a timeout, and then we looked at each other, and we always had little jokes and laughs that we would have with each other before kicks. So this was kind of really our first, if you miss this, you go home. If you make it, you continue to be undefeated type deal. And I just remember we looked at each other and we said cake. And it was like this little inside joke about a piece of cake, but it was more of a confidence thing of a joke than it was like a cocky type thing. And then when the moment happened, that we made it, and became kind of a blur after that. But I remember, seeing Officer Falls walk out with Coach Beamer, and I just remember both of them just looking like they were just the weight of the world was lifted off his shoulders, and he could finally breathe. And it was quite the moment after that.
And honestly, during that time, like I said, you were part of the kind of how Virginia Tech took off, really took off, became a national name. When you were there, I mean, in fact, that was your senior year where Tech made it to the national championship game. But from your perspective, How fun was it? Because it just seemed like during that time period, there was something really special being built, at Virginia Tech, and now, Virginia Tech everybody knows what Virginia Tech's all about, but just how special was it to be a part of kind of that era of Virginia Tech football?
I don't know what it was like before that era, and I've had glimpses into what it's been like since, just because I'm close with a lot of the guys that played after me. Um, but the thing that stood out that we had is we started to really gel into this team chemistry and culture that everyone cared about everybody. And when we had such a tight bond within that team, uh, I think we all just fed off of each other, and we all had confidence. And Jimmy Kipple had confidence in his game, but he had more confidence because he had confidence in my game, and I had confidence in mine because I had confidence in his. And we all had confidence in Michael, and Michael had confidence in us. And all the guys up front, we all believed in their ability to block and make sure that the running plays happen and make sure the quarterback was protected for pass plays. And we knew the receivers were fast enough. But when guys came off the field, we hugged each other, we loved each other, and we truly cared about each other. And no one cared that someone else got more attention than them, and someone else didn't get the article written about them. It was truly just a sense of team self first versus the people getting the individual accolades. And the thing is that because we cared about each other first, the individual accolades came for guys. Guys got those things, but it wasn't because they were seeking out those things. It was because it just happened to them because they were playing so well on a team level. And I think that's what made that team so special. And that's something that you give to the players for bringing a lot of it on themselves, but a lot of it is the coaches for creating that culture, because we knew that the coaches cared about us. I mean, to this day, there are so many coaches on that staff, some of them that still coach at other schools, that I still talk to and have so much respect for, but we all communicate with each other because we still have that bond with each other.
And see, that's what's so special, because obviously when you look at that era, I mean, on the outside, I mean, we were on the outside, but I mean, it was a special time, and, it's great for you to be a part of it. And then your college career is over, you go to the NFL, and I'm looking at the teams now. I'm borrowing this through Wikipedia, so correct me if I'm wrong. I'm looking at this through Wikipedia, but I'm looking at the list, and part of it is off-season practice squad teams. So your first team, the New Orleans Saints, then Seattle Seahawks, Buffalo Bills. So you spent 2001 season at those teams. Then in 2002 was Seattle, Carolina, and then the majority of your career with the Cincinnati Bengals, which I want to talk to you about that in a second too. Then the Baltimore Ravens and the New York Giants, New England Patriots in 2010, 2011, Washington Redskins, Dallas Cowboys, Miami Dolphins, Baltimore Ravens, 2012, Houston Texans, 2013, Cleveland Browns, Pittsburgh Steelers, 2013, New Orleans Saints for a couple of seasons there, and then the last stop, the Atlanta Falcons. So many questions I want to ask about this, because when you look at this list, you were on a team with Ben Roethlisberger, definitely retired, going to the Hall of Fame. Today, we officially got the word about Tom Brady. You were there for Tom Brady, but most of the time you were there. You played for the entire AFC North, and the only team you missed out on in the NFC East was the Philadelphia Eagles. But that is an impressive list, but it's not really surprising in some aspects because kickers do move around. So just your thoughts about, being a kicker in the NFL, and what was that like during that whole time period? Because you had a lot of places and you had a lot of good kicks.
Well, I was actually made aware during a football broadcast of some game that I have the record for the most active teams being played on. So I guess that's 10 active rosters that I've played games in. So, as fun as that sounds to be a part of, it also meant that I left a few teams, and not all of those were, hey, you're not good enough, you're cut. It was, okay, the guy that you were filling in for because he was injured is now healthy, so we now move on. And a lot of it towards the end, the back half of my career was, we want to bring in a guy for the future that's much younger and has more in front of them. And you're looking like you're 37, 38 years old. You're kind of at the end of your career type thing. So the one thing that stood out from all of that was when the Pittsburgh Steelers signed me, Mike Tomlin was talking to me in the hallway before he introduced me to the team. And he said, you know, a lot of people said something about you, you know, you've been let go from all these different teams. He's like, but the one thing that you can be proud of is that you can still say that all those teams all wanted you. So for every time you ended up leaving somewhere, you had another team that always wanted you to be there. And he's like, I think that's something you should be proud of. So I've always kind of carried that with me. But the one reason why it's obvious that kickers can move around so much is, one, you don't carry a backup kicker on your team. There is no, you know, it's funny how there were people that someone told them that I played football as a kicker or whatever in the NFL. And they're like, oh, are you the starting kicker? You know, because it would be someone who didn't really know anything that much about football. And I was like, yes, yes, I am. They don't carry a backup kicker except for in the preseason. So what happens is if a kicker gets hurt during a game, the punter tries to kick, because typically punters and kickers can do each other's job, but not at the same level. So sometimes you can have that person finish the game. Sometimes there is no one on the roster that can kick. So you just have to go for two and go for it on fourth down. And then what they do is that next week they bring in all of these free agents that are bouncing around or have not made it yet. And they have a little, what we call the gong show. And we all go through this gauntlet of kicking. And then one by one, they might tell you, okay, you can go ahead and go back. There's a box lunch for you. Van will take you to the airport so you can go back home. Or they'll bring us all up together at one time at the end and say, hey, all right, we're going to sign you, Shayne. The rest of you guys, y'all can go on to the locker room and shower up. We're going to go sign his contract. I mean, it's cutthroat. But, because you don't have to learn a playbook, it makes it a lot easier to transition from one team to the next.
Now, I'm going to circle back and look at this list. You've played on a team with a who's who of quarterbacks. I mean, think about the time you were there from 2000 to 2015. You were on a team, and if correct me if I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. You were on a team, Ravens had Joe Flacco when you were there, correct?
Yes.
And so you had Joe Flacco, then Eli Manning with the Giants, Tom Brady with the New England Patriots. You were on the team with Ben Roethlisberger, Drew Brees, and Matt Ryan. I mean, who can honestly say, hey, I played with these quarterbacks? I mean, is that real? And I'm not diminishing the fact you're a kicker, but you were there. You can honestly say that. You played.
My locker was beside most of them.
So how crazy is it to say, you can say to yourself, hey, I played with Matt Ryan, Ben Roethlisberger, Joe Flacco, Eli Manning, the GOAT, Tom Brady, all these kickers, and then obviously Andy Dalton was on the team with you too, I believe, right? Or no, Carson.
No, he came there after I left.
Carson Palmer too. So
yes.
How interesting is that? I mean, that's got to be just when you sit back and you look at it, you said, I played with a bunch of Hall of Fame quarterbacks and players too in general.
Well, I think when you're younger, it kind of strikes you a little more, but I think it just becomes a normal part of life because you become a little desensitized to it because you know that everybody on that team has their own role and you really don't. It's hard to explain. It's when you eating lunch with them every day, when you're practicing, when you're sitting around the locker room telling jokes, meeting, doing events where the families are around and all that, they just become like one of your buddies that you played, just like you played college and high school ball with. And you don't necessarily see them as being a special entity because the novelty has worn off because you're around them so much. But I'll admit it's definitely very cool. And, I never thought of it that way. So now you just gave me something. You gave me another party favor I could talk about if people want to talk about football.
Oh, and by the way, you played with Michael Vick in college. Oh, I forgot that too.
And that
I want to ask you this about Tom Brady. Obviously, the announcement happened today, Tom Brady, and it's the irony is, having this conversation with you on this. Talk about Tom Brady, just your thoughts and impressions on him. You did spend a season with him. What was it like being around him, and what was it like, just seeing him as a quarterback?
I mean, he's the ultimate professional. I mean, when you see a guy that comes in early, leaves late, almost everything he did throughout the day at work was, besides the little bit of time we had to kind of relax before and after practice. I mean, he's talking football with these receivers and running backs and linemen every chance he gets. He's doing some sort of little exercises for his shoulders, his elbows, his hands, his core. He's always got a band with him in the locker room doing some sort of little resistance exercise. He's very meticulous about everything that he eats, but yet he's also a funny, warm person to be around. And I think what surprises a lot of people that don't know what it's like being around someone like him, they have this perception from the outside that, oh, he's got to be like this or he's like that. And I'm like, no, actually, he's just like one of us. He just happens to do a few things a little differently, and he just happens to have a larger bank account, but much larger. But I think we sometimes build people into being something that we're not sure of, all because we only have certain glimpses that are afforded to us via the media or even tabloids or whatever, that we think like, oh, he's got to be like this or he's got to be like that. And it's really never truly the case when it comes to most people, because they're usually just an everyday down to earth person who just happens to have worked much harder than most other people to become exceptionally talented and skilled at something.
When I look again it's funny. I just mentioned that to you, but then the more it stays with me, it's like, gosh, you play with a lot of quarterbacks. Say that. I mean, just think about that. Who can say they played with all those quarterbacks? I'm sorry, I'm geeking out on that. My bad. I remember after.
I think you might have just found a new tweet for me to put out.
I know you can put that out. If you want to give me credit, fine, I'll take it. But if it bombs, you can say it was Jermaine's fault. But that is awesome. So then, and I remember we had a conversation a while back about you getting into coaching, because I remember you said, hey, I'm getting ready to head off to Central Michigan, to coach out there. And so you coached at, Central, you kind of, or the Wolverine State, Central Michigan, 2017, and then 2018-19, Michigan State, and then down to Florida. Talk a little bit about just coaching, making the transition from player to coach.
So a lot of the work ethic definitely plays into being a successful coach, but it's a different type of work. I mean, I had probably 1% of the computer skills I needed to have to be able to be a good coach, because coaching is a lot of office time. Everyone thinks, oh, you just get to go out and blow a whistle and yell at guys for a couple hours. I'm like, no, it's probably 10 hours in front of a computer. It's probably 2 hours on the field. And then you've got meetings and stuff you have to go to present all the work you did on the computer during those other hours. And it's, 15 to 20 hour days sometimes, and it wears on you. But the more you want to win, the more you want to build the men you're working with, the better your relationships come with them, the more it helps your team overall. And just being a part of the challenge of trying to win, but yet also make sure your players know that you care about them and that you don't care any less about them if they don't win. It's a dynamic that I'm proud to have been a part of. But it's a challenge. I mean, it's tough, and it's not for everyone. 15 to 20 hour days, 7 days a week during football season and part of the off season, and still long hours in the off season is a challenge. But I fell in love with all my players, and no matter what position these guys all played, I was able to have some really strong relationships that will last for a lifetime. And I'll always kind of cherish that. I just recently decided to get out of team coaching. So I will be coaching, but it will be more of a personalized business approach that I'm doing with it.
That's pretty awesome. And then one of your prized pupils, Evan McPherson. I mean, it's got to be interesting. I mean, a rookie kicker, a guy you coached, and then he's doing it at a place that was real close to you, the Cincinnati Bengals. I guess this is a sort of a two-part question. How neat is it to see the success? He was perfect in so far in the playoffs. I think he's 12 for 12 on field goals in long ones. I mean, he's ice. How neat is it to see one of your guys that you coach have the success, help leading the Bengals to the Super Bowl, and actually the Bengals, a place you spent a majority of your career? You know, how neat is to see it kind of match up so perfectly for you?
I'll admit, you know, I've gotten emotional here recently watching some of these games because, you know, the relationship I've built with him as far as mentoring him and trying to give him every advantage he could have before he got into the NFL, trying to help him learn from the mistakes that I made, trying to help him learn from the successes that I had, like trying to make sure that he had nothing catch him off guard situationally, physically, mentally, every scenario I could think. I was constantly having conversations with him about trying to prepare him for what he was getting ready to step into, and also keep in touch with him since then. That has been a very strong bond and connection no matter who he played for. Then you add that on top of the fact that Cincinnati is the one team that had me there the longest. I feel the most identity with that team. I went back and retired as a Bengal. Their special teams coach has been a mentor of mine from the time I played for him to when I got into coaching. He would bring me in and let me walk around with him and spend the whole day with him for, you know, days on end. When I was coaching at Michigan State or when I was coaching at Florida or coaching wherever, like we just had this bond where I could learn from him and we could bounce things back and forth off each other. And I have such a strong bond to the community of Cincinnati because that's where most of my charity work happened. And that's where I just felt like I connected with the fans the most. So it's when you bring both of those together, it's been overwhelming with how just emotional I will get when I see him making game-winning field goals to move the Bengals into the Super Bowl is just like, wow. I mean, that's overwhelming.
Were you part of, and this might sound like a dumb question, so was he already there? Because I mean, you were only at Florida for a couple of seasons, so he was already there when you got there, right?
Yeah, he was already there. So I knew we had a very physically talented kicker. I mean, just very physically talented. And in fact, my job with him, I never tried to change one thing about his technique or fundamental form. Everything I did was all routine-based, mental-based, process-driven, situational, like mental strength, confidence. Everything I did was built on building him for the future versus, hey, this is what you've got to do to make this kick type thing. And that gave him confidence to learn and grow. And that also gave him so many things that when they happen to him in real life, he's not caught off guard because I've already talked to him about how to prepare for that situation.
When was the last time you spoke to him, or have you spoke to him over the last couple of days?
Yesterday.
Wow, that has to be pretty cool. I guess another question is, are you going to go to the Super Bowl?
I tell you what, I played long enough. There are certain perks that came with playing in the NFL, some financial, some other stuff. I'm not willing to spend $20,000 to get to the Super Bowl. Tickets are absolutely ridiculous, and not to mention just the hotels, and I'm good. I will watch it from a big screen TV with friends and family, and all the beverage and food that I want, and be very comfortable watching it in my own home.
That's good stuff. Now, circling back to Virginia Tech, I did mention you were there at the time when Coach Pry was a graduate assistant, and then J.C. Price was a player there. And then now,
JC graduated right before I got there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. I got my year. The years kind of run together a little bit. Talk a little bit about just the direction of Virginia Tech right now, where they're going, with Coach Pry. I mean, it seems like Coach Pry is circling back to what Frank Beamer said about relationships and building relationships and recruiting the state, or recruiting within the area that he wants to. Your thoughts about when the announcement came down that Coach Pry was going to be the new head coach, and just your thoughts about the direction of the program right now?
I think it is on a very steep incline. I think that they are on their way up, and there were some moments in the last few years that just were fairly dark for Virginia Tech football, and I think that he's got everyone in a positive place. I think the one thing you learn about football coaching is that when teams win and lose, some teams have more talent than others, some teams have less talent than others. Doesn't guarantee who wins the game. Some teams may have coaches that know more experience with calling plays and this, that, and the other. Doesn't always make them win the game. But when you have coaches that care about their players, and when you have players that believe in their coaches because the coaches care about them and are willing to take hard coaching, because let's be honest, we've all heard coaches that have to be hard on their players, and sometimes in that moment it's not fun. But when players know that that coach care about them, they accept it and don't take it personal. They learn from it and they accept the coaching and grow from it. What makes a lot of these teams successful is there's so much talent out there to understanding the game of football when you're a coach that isn't necessarily what makes you the best coach. And I think putting great talent with knowing the X's and O's of football, with caring about your players, with caring about the culture and tradition of the institution that those players are in, I think go a long way. And I think that's something that really grew with what worked with Coach Beamer. And I think when you see that Coach Pry has seen it firsthand, a lot of his staff has seen it firsthand. You just see that it's going to meld into something that I think will be successful. He actually reached out to me and offered me a position on the staff, and I declined just because I wanted to be able to spend more time with my family and work on some other stuff. But that being said, I do plan on being more involved with the football program than I have since I played there. So I look forward to being able to be around the program more and do whatever I can do to help out and to be a part of it, and to be able to show my pride versus recruiting for other teams trying to get players that Virginia Tech was also trying to get, and me taking them with me to Florida instead. So now I can show my Hokie pride and not feel guilty about it when I'm coaching for another team.
Well, was it, you mentioned something interesting. How hard was it to recruit against your alma mater? Because you mentioned it. I mean, there were players that Virginia Tech was interested in, but in the end, you got them to go to wherever you were.
Yeah. I mean, it was tough, but yet when you're recruiting, I mean, not everybody gets to coach and recruit for the school that they played for. And when your job description is to recruit for the school that you work for, you get your players, you get your guys, because your job there's something on the line for your job there. And, it was funny. I actually recruited a kicker that I offered him, and then Virginia Tech offered him, I think, hours later or 15 minutes later, I think. And the kid ended up committing to me at Florida, and he's at Florida now. And I'll still have a good relationship with him, and I'll work with him at times. But it was just, it was hard because I told that kid, and I even told some of the staff at Virginia Tech, I'll never say a bad thing about you guys. All I can do is recruit and talk about the things that I can provide and that we can provide, versus they don't do this, they don't have that. And honestly, when you look at Virginia Tech now, it's not a matter of what they don't have. It's just a matter of, getting the guys there that want to be there.
When you go back on the campus, you look at the facilities, are you blown away by what has happened over the last few years with facilities and all the upgrades that they've done with the facilities?
Yeah, I mean, and they look great. That's the problem with college football that I see is it's such a, it reminds me of the 50s and 60s of the space race. And then, in the 80s, it was the nuclear missile race. It was always, it's like, who can have the most of whatever and, or be the first to do something. And in college football, you've got schools spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these facilities only to redo them again in a few years because some other schools spent a little bit more money on their facility. And it's all to try to basically be a shiny fish bait, like a lure that some fish is going to swim around in the water and see something shining and bite onto it. And then there's a hook on the other end of it. That's what recruiting is. It's dangling something shiny in front of these high school kids and trying to get them all to bite the hook. And it's not truly, what ends up next, usually you end up on the boat on a dinner plate after that. And I'm not saying that that's where it is everywhere, but that's essentially the process of that is we dangle these shiny things in front of these kids versus football, culture, academics. Like every school says all those things, but it comes down to a lot of these schools showing off their facilities and these perks that these players have. And honestly, in my opinion, having the best facilities doesn't necessarily help you win. It helps you get better players, probably that are highly recruited, but it doesn't always help you win because we've all seen players that didn't have to be the highest recruited guys in the world become stronger men and stronger players at Virginia Tech. And we've seen it at other schools as well, but it's getting the guys that you have that want to be there and getting the guys that want to be there to buy into what you want them to be able to achieve for themselves and the team. Wow. And I think the facility of Virginia Tech give them everything they could need. It's beautiful. But then it's a matter of what do they do when they're preparing to win and preparing to practice and playing together, and how does it all come together is how they believe in each other.
Wow, some awesome stuff. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Again, I'm with Shayne Graham, legendary kicker for the Pulaski County Cougars, Virginia Tech Hokies, NFL kicker, played with so many great quarterbacks. You heard him earlier during the interview. Some guy named Tom Brady, some guy named Ben Roethlisberger, and Drew Brees, and all the others. So this Ferrell's 5. These are 5 questions, rapid fire, but not rapid fire. And then, so question number 1, I kind of know the answer, but I'm gonna throw it out there. Team you wanted to beat the most in high school?
Salem.
I figured that was the one.
Yeah.
What was that? I know it seems, Pulaski has rivalries, but I think, the PH Pulaski rivalry is big, but I think it's Salem and PH is the real big one. What was that rivalry like?
With Salem, it was, honestly, I think it's almost treated like that was the biggest game of the season before the playoffs. They had a legendary coach in Willis White, who, by the way, I created a very great relationship with him after I left high school. Ended up becoming really good friends with him. But just the way he had such success at his program, I think both of us were always right at that precipice of wanting to be the best. And in order to be the best, you got to beat the best. So I think that's what we felt like. That was because they were always so good, and we felt like we were so good, and they were the team that could beat us. Like the year we won the state championship, we lost 2 games that year, Salem and EC Glass. And those 2 teams were the 2 teams that I always remembered were our 2 hugest rivalries. And we had rivalries with Fleming and PH and these other schools, but at the time we were winning those games, so we didn't have the content for those schools.
Good stuff. I tell you, what's funny? I'll tell you a story. This was 1989. It was my sophomore year at PH, and it was Pulaski and PH for the district title at Victory Stadium. And Pulaski filled up the other side of it. And keep out, you remember Victor Stadium was 25,000 seats.
Oh, it's a big stadium.
And Pulaski filled up their side of Victory Stadium. And I'm gonna tell you right now, loud as I ever heard Victory Stadium. Usually Victory Stadium was loud for PH Fleming games. Loud as I ever heard Victory Stadium. And it was funny. I knew what the Rams felt like when they were at home against the 49ers. And we had a large crowd, but that whole side was full. And it was funny, I mean, when they were out booing, we were on the field and they were louder than our fans. That's a program right there, I can tell you right now. So all right, now I'm gonna ask you a college question.
Okay.
Team you wanted to beat the most when you were at Virginia Tech?
I guess it was always Miami. No. Let's start that over. Ask me that question again.
Okay. And there's so many good. I don't think there's really a wrong answer, because there's so many choices.
I gave the wrong answer because we always beat Miami. I gave the wrong answer.
But Tech. I mean, I think y'all beat them 4 in a row or something like that during your time.
Yeah, I never lost.
You never lost to Miami.
No.
There you go. Well, there you go. The White Vic also reminds me of that too. He says, "Hey, we never lost to Miami."
But but I have a different answer.
Okay, I'll ask you too. Okay, Shayne Graham, team when you were a Virginia Tech hockey player, team you want to beat more than anyone else?
It was definitely UVA, and we split with UVA 2-2 my 4 years. And I have good friends that played on UVA. Consider Thomas Jones a good friend, and we joke with each other about it. And we give each other a hard time when they play each other now, although it's a little lopsided at this point. But it's one of those things where in-state rivalry, especially when you have what feels like 2 different types of cultures within the school. We always considered ourselves the blue collar type school. They consider themselves the white collar school. But in the long run, there was all this like big brother, little brother. You guys drink Zima and Jolly Ranchers. We drink beer. It's just different. I believe that we felt like there was this air of they looked down upon us. So we always just felt like this is one we've got to win because just can't stand the thought of them walking away from here as the winner for this game.
That's funny. So it was my third question. All right, and I won't ask you. Well, I could ask you this, but I mean, you played for so many teams. That might be a hard question to ask the team you want to beat the most. But it is a 2-parter. Your favorite place to kick and your least favorite place to kick in the NFL?
Favorite place to kick, I would say
Paul Brown Stadium.
I enjoyed it. Not favorite.
I'm just teasing you.
I would say there were a few stadiums, even though it was I'm thinking stadium.
I would figure you would say a dome because I'm sure most kickers would love.
And that's what I'm trying to think of because I think I always enjoyed playing in St. Louis. I never missed in St. Louis, and I always had good games there. But I enjoyed playing in in Nashville also because I remember I always felt like I had really good games there. The weather always seemed to cooperate whenever we played there late in the season. And I thought it was, I like Nashville. I thought it was fun, but definitely a lot of the indoor stadiums when you don't have to worry about the wind, I guess I always enjoyed that. And then when I think about the places that I disliked kicking the most, it would be between Pittsburgh and the old Candlestick Park, just because the wind patterns in both of those stadiums. Candlestick was just so hard to predict what the wind was going to do to the football. And then Pittsburgh, you had to deal with the open end of the wind blowing always in your face on the open end. But then early on, the turf there, the grass was really pulled up really easy and was hard to have good footing. So as a kicker, that's just something that you hate to have that be a part of your process to deal with that.
That's something right there. Okay, question number 4. Question number 4. Shayne Graham is having a dinner party. I mean, because you rolling like that, you got it like that. Hey, you the man. You can invite 5 people from the world of sports. Who would those 5 people be and why?
I would, I think obviously Michael Jordan would be one because
The sweatshirt
just
you're wearing.
a high-level competitor, and I think it would be entertaining to see how he interacted, turning something into a competition at dinner.
And the sweatshirt you're wearing too.
What's that? Oh,
And
yes.
because of the sweatshirt you're wearing.
And the sweatshirt I'm wearing. And a couple of the shoes.
There you go.
I would probably have to invite Charles Barkley just to hear those two talk trash to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Charles is funny. Probably Tiger Woods, just because he's also a very high, and just to feed and learn off these guys having conversations. And that's something I've always tried to do when I'm around people, is remember things that they say that I feel like can apply to me at some point, and I'll write it down in my little notebook that I always have around and try to pick up some stuff. But just knowing that such a high level competitor is what I find to be like the attractive part of that is people that have been highly successful because of their work, not because of luck. Another one, I guess it would have to be Pele, because he was probably one of my earliest like soccer icons, him and Diego Maradona. I'd probably say that one of those two guys would have to be in that one. And then I guess Pete Gogolak.
Yeah, that's a good
First soccer style kicker in the NFL.
Yeah,
Just to hear him tell stories of what it was like to be considered such an outsider, but also to have completely influenced the NFL world as much as he did, because he completely revolutionized the art of kicking a field goal.
Wow, that is fascinating. And then my final question for you, Ferrell's 5, what is one thing that people don't know about you that they would be surprised to know about you?
Well, if it weren't for social media, I would say that I would say that people wouldn't know that I was kind of a football helmet nerd, but I think a lot of people already know that. I have a huge collection of football helmets, mini and full size, hundreds and hundreds of them, but too many people know that because I've posted about it. I think I've always wanted to be a pilot. I have a huge fascination with like aeronautical engineering, military history of flight, all that kind of stuff. Whenever I'm traveling, I love road trips. I love to drive. My wife, it drives her crazy that I love driving so much, but I was explaining how, like, on a lot of my road trips that I've done in my lifetime, I like to stop in every aerospace, flight museum I can find. I'll stop and walk around it for hours, and I'll wait for one of the tour guides to finish a group, and then I'll have them go one-on-one with me around me and teach me as much as they can teach me about stuff. And I actually started flight school and never finished it. So it's kind of something that's always kind of been on the back burner, and who knows, maybe I'll pick that back up sometime soon.
Yeah, you got time to do all that good stuff, as they say.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. The last time the Cincinnati Bengals were in the Super Bowl, they played that Super Bowl, Super Bowl 23, Montana, to John Taylor, knocked off the Bengals, January of 1989. So what were you doing in January of 1989, or that time period?
January of 1989, I was probably in the bleachers of a high school talking trash to my sister's opposing team while she was playing for a state championship or something.
Is that crazy to wrap your brain around it? Because see, that was my ninth grade year, because it was junior high, because we didn't have the high school. The freshmen weren't in the high schools yet. But that was my ninth grade year. So in junior high, watching that Super Bowl. I mean, how crazy is that Cincinnati's gone this far without getting there? And then obviously, your close connection in so many ways with that. It's kind of crazy to wrap your brain around that.
Yeah. Well, and as crazy as that is, I remember the Icky Shuffle. I remember, pulling for the Bengals actually that year, because I was a Bears fan at that time of my life. And I figured, well, since the Bears are out of it, I'm going to pull for the Bengals because their helmets look cool. And, obviously when they lost the game, at one point, I think Jim Breach was going to be the MVP for kicking a bunch of field goals. And then all of a sudden that switched up when Joe Montana ruined it. But, you could be in Detroit's place, who's never, ever, ever, ever been there, or you could be in Cleveland, who's never, ever been there, post Super Bowl era. So it could be worse, but the fact that they're there now is amazing. And I'll tell you what, I get more nervous watching those games than I did when I played, because obviously you have no control over it when you're watching it as a fan. And I just recently, told a bunch of people, like, I've never been able to be a fan, and it's actually, I'm really enjoying it. And I look forward to having a chance to, go watch more Virginia Tech games, and go watch Bengal games, and go watch some other players that I've had relationships with as a coach play at their respective schools and NFL teams. So I'm excited for it. And it's been fun to watch these playoffs and not have to worry about scouting the game or something, like what I've always had to do for work.
That's awesome stuff. So, and we've talked about this before, you being a mass comm major, so you know how our schedules can be and how demanding it was. But what was it like taking those classes at Virginia Tech? Because obviously the program now has really exploded with Bill Roth and what they're doing now. But what was it like back then to be a mass comm major, and then seeing what Virginia Tech is doing with that program?
I mean, it's amazing. And back then, honestly, it was still competitively, compared to a lot of other schools, it was still up there as one of the better programs. But seeing the kind of the priority that they've put into that program and developing it is amazing. I mean, I still remember, the editing machine on a Super VHS and thinking, oh, it's Super VHS, not just a regular VHS. And the scrolling wheel that we use to get everything set. Just looking at like the way the studios were set up back then and to how things are now, the camera difference in technology. I think that's obviously something that everyone's going to see as time goes. But to see what Virginia Tech's done with it and the success that their students are having, some of them very early in their careers, is a testament to the university itself. I mean, if you ask me, I think the fact that they've made it such a successful program, and you see so many people that I see on Twitter that are Virginia Tech alumni that are in the media world is something that I take pride in seeing that for them. But just Southwest Virginia in general, I like the fact that the school can represent the Southwest Virginia area and show that it's not just mountain culture folk that aren't educated. It's a very strong educational system that puts people into the workforce that are successful, and they don't have to wear ties to football games and sing the New Year's song when their team finally scores a touchdown.
Yeah, I wonder what that jab was about. No. So one thing that was interesting you mentioned, Shayne, as we were talking, you didn't mention anything about on-air stuff. You mentioned about behind-the-scenes stuff, the editing equipment, the cameras, which a lot of times people when they talk about being in this industry, they want to be in front of the camera and do all that. And I love every part of it. I love the in front of it. I love the behind the scenes. I love how the sausage is made. Did you have a desire of doing more on in front of the camera, behind the camera? Or
Oh, I did most of my stuff was in front of the camera, but as you have to learn all facets of it because, especially during a time and age when a lot of the stations were cutting budgets and you had cameramen and editors where all of a sudden the reporter became the cameraman and the editor and the reporter all in one.
Right.
So all of those skills were taught to us. And, when I played in Cincinnati, I had I would put together a feature package every week for one of the local channels that I put out, to have, was part of a little deal that my marketing people put together for me because they knew that I loved broadcasting and potentially wanted a career in it after football. I wrote a weekly article for the newspaper every week, and I had a talk show on the radio every week. So I was very involved in that world. I just think I eventually decided that I didn't want to be in front of a camera because I wanted to be more in the private space versus the recognizable space. I think I had a lot of the recognition from playing that I kind of, when I was finished with playing, it was more of people might recognize me from playing, people might recognize me as a coach, but I don't want to put it in their face every day. And I didn't want to be in the spotlight. I would prefer to be kind of more of a private life.
That's awesome. Well, Shayne, I tell you what, this has been awesome. The WFXR Sports Sit Down on WFXRTV.com. I appreciate you giving me time. I think you're awesome. I think the world of you. Again, following your career from Pulaski to Virginia Tech throughout the NFL, and just the fact you played with a lot of stinking Hall of Fame. I mean, I'm still, and it just dawned on me. I'm looking and say, okay, so Ben was there, and Tom was there, and Eli was there, and Drew was there, and he played with Michael Vick. I mean, that is
Rodney Peete.
Rodney Peete too. No one can say that. No one can say, it's kind of like, okay, hold my beer. Here are the quarterbacks I played with. No one's going to top that list. Nobody. You talk about Super Bowls and Super Bowl winning quarterbacks, and of course you played with the GOAT, but that's impressive. So, but yeah, you're awesome. Not only, you're an awesome guy, and I really appreciate you giving me time. I'm glad you're feeling better. And like I said, we appreciate you on the WFXR Sports Sit Down on WFXRTV.com. We got a link up. You're up in Michigan now, right? You say you're in Michigan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess if I'm in the area, or when you come down here for a game, I bet you there's one game you're probably looking forward to is that Thursday night game against West Virginia.
Oh yeah. Well, and I'm hoping to get down for as many games as I can. Yeah. I just know that'll be my priority is Virginia Tech games, and then I've got to get to some Bengal games, and then I've got to get to a few other college games where some good friends are now on those staffs, and some players that I coached are now there or whatever. So, but definitely making it a priority, and I'll be coming down for the spring game as well.
Okay, well, we'll link up down there then.
Sounds good.
All right, appreciate you, Shayne. Get Shayne Graham, awesome kicker. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.